Afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to our last session of this afternoon, and we're looking at the environment. For this session. So, basically, understanding, the huge, vast range of different tools out there to actually measure exactly what is going on your farm, current techniques, some of the future technologies as well, and actually hear some practical examples of how some of the environmental improvements have been achieved in the outdoor pig sector, and some of the value of these types of environmental improvements in terms of the numbers itself, and also some of the more intangible benefits as well. So, got a great lineup of speakers here to talk to you this afternoon. We'll have a similar format to the other sessions that you might have been involved in. So we'll have presentations, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A and discussion after that. So our panellists this afternoon, very pleased to welcome Helen Evans from ADAS, Robert McGregor, an outdoor pig producer, LSB, I've got those letters the right way round, LSB Pigs from East Anglia, and we've got John Gilliland as well, Professor John Gilliland, who's, you made a funny face at that. That's your official title, isn't it, John?
I'm a farmer.
Farmer John today, who's doing some work with AHDB and also a farmer in his own right as well. So we'll first start with Helen, who will then pass on to the speakers as we go through this afternoon. Warm welcome, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the harmonisation of carbon footprinting review, which is a very long-winded name for DEFRA. Asked ADAS to look at comparing some of the carbon footprinting tools out there and seeing what the variations were and the disparities were within them, and whether there was any scope to try and get some level of harmonisation, hence that term. But before I go into that, I thought something that would be more useful would be to go through what a carbon calculator is and what you need to think about within the pig sector if you're going to choose to use a carbon calculator. Before I dive into it, I just wanted to ask, is anybody here who actually is a pig farmer, just out of interest? Hands up. Excellent. And have any of those pig farmers, singular I think, done either entertained or actually done a carbon footprint on their business? You have. Excellent. Okay. So there is a level of usage of these tools out there within the pig industry, maybe more within some of the other livestock systems, but nevertheless it's something that is an emerging area of activity within the pig sector. Okay, so I just want to outline the role of carbon calculators. They're an off-the-shelf tool, although you can have them designed specifically for particular systems, whether that be at a product level, a farm level, or a supply chain level, and they're designed there to help simplify greenhouse gas emissions, the assessment of those. They've already created the calculations to make it easier for the farmer or for the individual looking at that system. So the calculations are already done behind the scenes. They're looking at methodology and also the emissions factors for all of the elements associated with producing that primary agricultural product. And then the user that's in inverted commas, just has to collect activity data in terms of what happens on that farm or to produce that product or along that supply chain. And then enter that data. So that's the tool is there to try and make that whole process easier and smooth that out. And as a result, there's a template. The thing that you normally get is live calculation of the results. So you put the benefits of having a carbon calculator tool. It goes into a big system, and that big system is filled with the carbon footprints that have been done on all of the other farms across the whole of the UK, or for that sector globally, whatever it is. And then that carbon footprinting tool is being updated with data sets when they're doing comparison, or with emission factors as they get updated on an ongoing basis. So it gives you some current information, which again is useful normally for management systems. And then once you've done the hard graft of putting the data in first time, you can then start to tweak that data, whether or not you want to look at what's the impact as regarding emissions emissions or carbon if I do a certain change within the system, or whether I'd want to repeat it and you start to use it for benchmarking. John's going to talk about benchmarking and the benefits of that after myself and Rob. But the value of being able to track changes and see what changes you've done in the business and what impact that might have, not necessarily on productivity, although productivity and carbon are very strongly correlated, but maybe looking at it in terms of those emissions and also hopefully storage and sequestration as well. So one of the key things we say when somebody says, well, I want to measure my carbon, the question we would throw back at them is, why are you assessing emissions? What is it you actually want to do this for? Who is your target audience? Sometimes on a farm level it's because the supply chain is saying and asking you to participate in a carbon conversation, whether it's they want you to actively reduce your carbon or whether they just want you to be able to show that you're starting the conversation and you have started carbon footprinting. But who is the target audience for your assessment? Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it for your retailer? Are you doing it for your supply chain? Because that will then frame which type of tool you want to use. What is it you're assessing? So, well, that sounds obvious, but actually think about the boundaries you're using. Are you looking at one enterprise within the farm? Are you looking at the farm as a whole? When you say the farm as a whole, are you including all of the non-farming activities you do on that farm? Also potentially, particularly for pig enterprises, if you're involved in maybe some level of AD activity as well, do you include that AD activity? Is it within the farm your control or is it outside of your control? So thinking about where the boundaries are of what you're assessing is really fundamental. And then how do you assess the emissions? That's where you need to start to think about what type of carbon calculator might be useful, or whether you need something that's designed and bespoke for your particular sector. If we've got people here from processors or retailers or feed companies, you might be interested in using a particular type of methodology that suits your type of business or the types of information that you want to get out. And if you're a farmer, you might be looking at something that's taking much more of a whole farm approach, and some of the tools are better at that than others. And then fundamentally, you actually need to put some data into carbon calculators. So we need to then get down to at a farm level. What data do we need? Where do you find that data? And then there's a process of actually inputting that into the system. Some of them are more farmer friendly than others, and some of them are farmer friendly but could do with maybe somebody walking alongside you, and then others may be looking more using a consultant to help you do that. So they come in all shapes and sizes, but all of those questions up on the screen there are ones which are important for you at whatever stage you are at within the industry you think about. So I try not to talk about terms like good or bad, or better or worse, because the carbon conversation can get very, very convoluted and also can get quite emotive as well in terms of the types of language that people use. No one tool gives the correct answer. They're all useful for something. They're all built on assumptions, so therefore, because they're things that can be used across sectors or across products, they have to have a level of standardization assumptions written in, each of them make slightly different sets of assumptions. So for instance, they may decide different assessments made about how much carbon is embedded in each of the fertilisers that are used. But they can help you identify hotspots on the farm, and they will help you understand how some changes will impact on emissions. So if you make changes around choice of fertiliser, cultivation method, particularly for the pig sector, if you're making changes or looking at making changes around your feed choice, and what type of feed systems you want to use, and also your manure management options, those they can help you look at what changes in your system on those types of things will therefore mean regarding emissions and potentially carbon capture as well, potentially. So you need to choose the tool that helps you answer your questions. And the next couple of slides just give you a little bit around what tools measure well and maybe what tools measure less well. So we feel brave enough to say these across the piece. So they tend to measure productivity, embedded emissions from fertiliser manufacture and fuel usage pretty well. It's fairly easy to get standardised, accurate figures on those sides of things, so the tools across the piece measure those well. They measure pretty well some level of standard manure management and standard fertiliser applications. It's not too bad at all. What they're less good at is when you want to add specificity, really good quality specificity for your business and your enterprise. So really good quality detailed mitigation activity around if you're wanting to look at different manure application practices, the granularity of the information that you get out of the system, out of the tools does vary. And then also carbon sequestration is something that everybody's really, really interested in and wants to really get to grips with. And because of the complexity around carbon sequestration, particularly below ground carbon sequestration, that can be really quite a tricky one for using the off-the-shelf tools to help you with that. They don't have all the answers, but they're a really, really good starting point, the standard ones that you can get in the marketplace. But just remember that sometimes the data requirement on either end, either what the tool is asking you to provide or what you want to provide and what the tool can cope with, sometimes that's a bit too much. It can feel a bit too much, and therefore it can feel a bit difficult. And also your evidence that you're providing, or the evidence that the tools are making their assumptions on in order to help the farmer move through the process, may not always be as robust as you would like it to be, or the sector would like it to be, or as consistent. But the thing to keep in mind is that all of the companies generating carbon footprinting tools have all of this in mind, and it's something they're always working on and very mindful of as they progress and these tools become more mature and more developed within the marketplace. So when you're thinking about what to use, which tool do I use, it's really confusing. What do I do? I want something that's going to be useful for me, wherever you are within the industry. Consider these things, and there's no right or wrong to these. These are just the consideration factors. Is it free of charge? Does that matter to you, whether or not you have to pay for it or whether it's free? And there are that then has influences to some degree what type of systems you get. Do you need it to cover all UK farming systems, or do you just need it to look at one or two of them? And then within that, sectors, and then within that, does it need to include all the farming systems, or that may or may not be relevant? Some of the tools will cover all systems well, some do some systems better than others. Is carbon sequestration an important element to you? And if it is, are you interested in above ground and below ground soil carbon sequestration? And are you willing to accept there might be a little bit of a fudge factor on this side of things, but it'll start you on the conversation around sequestration. If you're interested in carbon balance, so that's thinking about, okay, not just the emissions, but also what is there on the farm in terms of storage and sequestration, and thinking about that balance, can I get that out of the carbon footprint? A lot of farmers find the process often quite daunting to start off with, so that interface is really important. Is it user-friendly? Is it user-friendly for, it doesn't matter whether you're an expert, a consultant, or whether a farmer, that data set is yours. You want to be able to interact easily and move through the steps of actually going through the footprint, so is it friendly for you to use? Then KPIs are really important. Quite a few of the tools make an effort to try and align or correlate your emission results along with KPIs, so thinking about productivity and whether or not the business is performing well in terms of its output. Remember that most of these tools are looking at kilograms of CO2 equivalent output per kilograms of products that you produce. So those two are very strongly correlated, and often if you're running a business that is performing efficiently, then your carbon footprint will be lower. I'm sure that's something that John will cover a bit later on. Is there transparency around the data and how it's being managed within the tool? Is there anything around GDPR in terms of thinking about you're giving consent and what they might do with your information? And then thinking about, are you getting regular updates? So all of these tools are regularly updated, and increasingly since the harmonisation review that AHDB did with DEFRA, that is something that's much more prominent. There's much more information coming out within the marketplace now about what updates are happening. And then fundamentally, it's great having a footprint. That's a really good starting point. It's interesting. It helps you if you're curious about that side of things. But what do you do with that? Does the tool actually provide you with some starting points to look at making changes on the farm? And if you have an idea about which changes you'd like to make on the farm, will it help you decide whether or not they're the priorities regarding emissions? So is it useful for you on the farm? And also just thinking specifically for this sector, the pig sector, renewables and anaerobic digestion. So all of the tools look at renewables and AD to some degree, but it is very variable across them. How the information is captured and how it's reported varies across the calculators. Fundamentally with renewables and AD, that goes back to that question around the farm boundary. Where is the boundary? Is all the AD within the farm business, and then it's probably a lot easier for you to look at it, or you're exporting product. And the same applies for renewables. Are you generating renewables entirely within the farm enterprise, and then are you using that fully within the farm activity, not the domestic activity on that holding, but within the farm activity, or you're exporting it to other businesses or into the grid? And again, all of the tools will deal with that in slightly different ways. The thing to be clear on, though, is renewables and AD, they both help regarding reducing emissions to the farm as a standard statement, really. It's likely for a pig unit that AD was be more have more impact regarding emissions reduction and helping particularly around obviously manure emissions and also displacing fossil fuels. And then renewables again obviously do help offset or inset emissions, and because you're looking at a reduction of fossil fuel use on the farm as well. So, you know, just because carbon footprinting doesn't include them doesn't necessarily mean they're not good things to do if we're using sort of simplistic terms. Okay. So I was asked just to cover briefly the DEFRA harmonisation review. This is a piece of work that was to try and look at the level of divergence in farm level of assessment, so carbon footprinting that's done at a farm level, and see what the divergence is and take a deep dive into having a look at where that sits and which sectors maybe there's bigger divergence than others, and provide some recommendations to both industry and government about what could be done to try and look at harmonising and getting a better level of parity across these tools. So we identified a set of calculators. We had to choose and whittle it down from when it was looked at. There's probably more by now, but 18 months ago there were 81 calculators in the marketplace globally, so to try and whittle that down to between 5 and 7, so we chose 6, but between 5 and 7 across different livestock and arable systems. And then we designed 20 model farms, so within the pig sector we looked at an indoor rearing system and an outdoor breeding system, and they were the 2 pig model farms that were looked at for this. And then trying to look at the variation between the calculators and the sources of variation, look at what is out there in terms of whether the calculators are following latest science, and then provide recommendations. So the good news is that all of them are able to provide a farmer with that baseline understanding. They're all valuable to provide that baseline understanding regarding emissions, and they can start that process of conversation at a farm level regarding decarbonisation, if that was the premise about going into that, into going through the process. But the robustness of the calculations and the emission factors were different across all of them. They all chose different boundaries around the system, and then the level of precision as well was very variable. And therefore there was a high level of variation in outputs, which this graph will help you understand a little bit more. So I've just picked out here cereals and pigs and poultry, and you can see here, so the ones that had very similar results across the calculators, for this target audience, I'm quite pleased to be able to say that for that specialist pigs one, and that is the indoor rearing system, there weren't that many differences between the calculators. You can see that they're quite clustered there. For poultry, there's a bit of clustering, but then there was one calculator that sat much higher up, and it's obviously very variable. And then for that specialist pigs, and maybe because it's outdoor systems, they're much harder to try and standardise. There's much wider variation across all of those different types of footprinting tools. So that just gives you an understanding that where everything's sat. And then just a reminder really, hopefully you guys have got some level of insight into this yourselves. For the pig industry, most of the emissions are coming from feed and manure management. And you can see here the A, B, D and E are 4 tools, different tools, and you can see how the way that the same information was represented and calculated by each of those models are different. They're all valuable in their own way, but they're all different. And you can see there, for instance, D doesn't have any enteric there at all, and then because it was captured in as part of the manure system, for instance, manure management system. For the A and B, you can see that the quantities are not that different to each other, but nevertheless they are still different. So there is significant variety between the systems. So why is that? We talked about system boundaries, emission factors. This has been smoothed out to some degree since the harmonisation review was happening. ADAS had a real challenge that just as we started, these carbon footprinting tools aren't static, and because of the marketplace developing and the demands from the farming industry for more and better quality carbon footprinting as we go along, those tools were actually going through reviews and updates while we were doing the harmonisation process. So when we started, the emission factor, the data sources that they were being used were variable. By now they've smoothed out and they're all using the similar emission factor data sets, which is great. So data entry, so again you've got human I was going to say error, but that's human variability associated with this. So the level of detail that the farmer or the consultant put in and the support they have in entering that data varies from business to business effectively. So again, smoothing that out with good quality guidance, good quality advice, training, etc. is a key thing really. So the calculations, what level of detail is used. So when you think about what the type of information that's put in and the depth of that information that's being requested, that varies across the calculators. And then we're talking about carbon stocks. So if you want a different method, if you're managing the carbon in different ways, soil carbon or above ground carbon, when you're thinking about vegetation, how are those included in those changes and how are they calculated? There was quite a lot of variability between those. And then when we're talking about what do you need to, does the footprint give you advice or provide you with a good quality baseline for you to then move on in terms of mitigation? Again, there was different ways of interpreting that between the different tools. This pretty much says the same thing, but just maybe more visually, so some of you may be wanting to look at that. So the aspiration is to try and help the industry and government move towards some level of harmonisation, while still acknowledging this is a commercial marketplace. So all of these tools, there is no government carbon footprinting tool, there's no sort of nationally owned carbon footprinting tool. They're out there, they're private products that are trying to work with the industry, so they all need their own USP in terms of being able to say, well, please use ours over and above another one, etc., or ours is more appropriate in your system. But nevertheless, they all wanted there is an acknowledgement that to try and move to some level of harmonisation to help build the industry trust in the tools, and they feel that they're useful and increasingly more useful as we go along. So defining the boundaries, aligning the standards. I've already said that there's been smoothing out regarding using latest IPCC calculations, using consistent results, and then also building transparency and giving the industry a bit more confidence in those. So the good news was that we feel that a lot of the areas of divergence between the calculators can be really easily addressed. There's quite a lot of things which aren't real deal breakers. They're things that can be tweaked quite easily across all of them, and the industry has responded quite positively to that. And there will always be differences in calculators, often for good reasons to do with looking at what particular sectors need, or particular marketplaces potentially want as well. But there are still things that can be done to actually mean that they're closer to each other in terms of their outputs. The fundamental here is that we would never advise a farming business to use one carbon footprinting tool 1 year and then use another one and then try to compare the results. That's fundamentally not a good, and you wouldn't do that normally with any KPI comparisons. You wouldn't necessarily do that with other tools that you use within your business. Don't do that with carbon footprinting tools either. It's not a sensible thing to do. Try and make a good decision about which one you want to start with. Have a go at another one if you want, but don't compare them to each other, and then stick with it, because of course, like you would with benchmarking, the more data sets that you have, using the same tool year on year is going to be much more powerful and beneficial to you as a business. So you've seen the recommendations, I've already covered those and I'm mindful of time. So I just wanted to say that the industry response to the harmonisation review has been pretty positive, and the recommendations that come out of it provide a focus both for each carbon footprinting product regarding updates and alignment, and they've responded quite well to that, being keen to show that they have taken notice of that, have said either we're already doing that anyway, or we've already done that, or yes, we're looking to move towards that ourselves. And those recommendations are sitting there both for government and industry, and there's been a real commitment from both parties really to try and work on those recommendations within what is a very dynamic market landscape really. AHDB has an important role in terms of providing useful advice on this at a farmer level to try and help farmers navigate their way through stuff that some people find really quite another tricky thing to think about. And then also there's the Food Data Transparency Partnership, which is set up to help with farm data and looking at harmonisation of data, and this is one of their briefs, and AHDB is a member of that. And then I just wanted to take it back to at a farm level, and the sorts of things that you should ask as a farmer, or you can encourage your farmers within your sector to ask. Does the supply chain need a specific carbon calculator? And if that's the reason for doing it, you need to use what they're asking you to do. Does it cover the pig or poultry system that you use? There's one of the tools doesn't actually cover pigs at the moment. They haven't updated that side of things. So one of the tools, for instance, you wouldn't want to use at this moment in time for that. And do you need a farm level assessment across the farm as a whole for all the enterprises that you have on the farm, or do you want a product, as in the pork product or the poultry product or a specific arable product, or do you actually want a bit of both, because some of them can do one or the other and some of them can do both? Does it have really good quality feed emission factors? Now that's particularly relevant for the pig sector because that's where most of your emissions are coming from. So you want to make sure that you've got able to put in good quality data that provides good granularity from your system into that. And then again, likewise, because that's where most of the emissions come from within the pig sector, is it modelling your manure management system accurately, and can it accommodate for any changes that you might want to do within your manure management system and provide you with pretty robust, good quality advice on that. And then finally, just to say, in England and in Wales and also in Scotland, there is funding for carbon footprinting at a farm level carbon footprinting. Please use it, it's available, it's a good way for you to start the journey and the process if you're curious about this. And do the carbon footprinting for yourself. Don't do it for anybody else, do it for yourself. It's a really good way of a different lens to put on your business when you're thinking about productivity, when you're thinking about efficiency. It's just a slightly different way of looking at it. And the money available in England is through the Resilience Fund from DEFRA, the FFRF it's called. AHDAS is one of those consultancy firms out there doing that, but there are others as well all over England doing that. So I'd really strongly recommend that you go through the process of getting that if you're interested, or recommend it to your farmer clients. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate being given the opportunity to share my enthusiasm for the subject that I'm going to talk to you about. I look after a couple of outdoor breeding farms in North Norfolk on very light sandy soil. Because of that, we got involved a number of years ago, about 6 years ago, with group meetings in the Swaffham area to discuss what we could do, a collaboration with various environmental agencies and a couple of manufacturers, AHDB included, to see what we could do to look after the water resources, the natural water resources that are found in our area. After several meetings, it was decided that we should set up a trial. We'd already been experimenting with green cover on our farm, planting grass, putting the pigs, the sows onto grass as opposed to stubble. And it was something we were keen to do more of, so we volunteered ourselves forward, got involved in the trial. The main aim of the trial was to see how we could use a proactive management approach to protect the soil and to benefit the pig production itself, to prevent damaging the watercourses, hopefully help the arable rotation that we farm alongside our landlord, and whilst doing that, if we could help support and encourage biodiversity, then that would also be a good thing. So one of the early decisions we had to make on commencement of the trial is what we were actually going to plant. There's a number of seed mixes available to us. We have a very short window between harvest and us moving the sows on, and we needed to select varieties and grass mixes which were going to give us a quick establishment, enable us to withstand the sows once they arrive. One of those mixes we chose was grass only, predominantly rye grasses, but it also included a creeping red fescue. The second mix was a grass mix that included, it was basically a fallow mix. A lot of people know it as the AB15. So it's grasses, but it's also got clover in there, bird's foot trefoil and vetches as well. We did also experiment with a herbal lay, which was predominantly things like chicory, plantain, I think there was vetch there as well, and a different variety of clover, tiny amount of grass. The sows absolutely loved it and demolished it, ate it down to a level that it was unable to recover from in a very short period of time. So after that, the trial really focused just on the two, the grass mix and the herbal lay. The aim was to investigate, I've pinpointed there 5 key criteria that we were hoping to look at. Obviously, as I've already said, establishment and longevity. We wanted to be able to get a grass mix which was not just going to be there for 6 months. We're on the field for 2 years, and it was really important to us that we retained as much as we possibly could. Grass mix has obviously got to be able to cope, have the ability to cope with the sows grazing it, which they do fanatically. They absolutely love to graze, and also the potential of them poaching it, so areas of field getting wet, the sows are still visiting them. We wanted something which was tough enough really to withstand the traffic of the sows on top of them. Pig productivity and economics is obviously important to us as well as farmers, so that was another area we looked at. The agencies, the environment agencies we were involved with came in and started doing soil structure measuring, not just sticking a spade in the ground, but also deep core sampling as well, and taking those away and analysing. And in the process of doing that, number 5 there, they're looking at nutrient retention and basically seeing what we were losing through runoff as a result of leaching. There's several things that we already knew, and a few things that we were hoping to be able to conclude by running the trial. Obviously, we were hoping that the sward's ability to reduce runoff and water erosion was going to be important to us. In the past, when we've been on bare fields, we've suffered a lot from gullying, very deep gullying, right through the topsoil into the subsoils below. That runs off site, sometimes makes it all the way to possibly a highway or into woodland or an adjacent field. And the other thing to bear in mind there is when it eventually stops, the subsoil tends to end up on top of the topsoil, so we're actually turning, and that never sorts itself out. That turns the whole thing upside down. The great thing about green cover is it actually physically provides protection to the soil itself, the leaf cover over it, which is of great importance. We were keen to reduce wind erosion. I'm sure you've probably been to East Anglia or Norfolk. It's pretty windy in Norfolk, and we used to suffer soil being blown around pretty much all year round, but as soon as we had a dry spell, there was soil blowing around. Not nice for us, not good for the fields. We know that the roots were going to bind the soils together, holding nutrients and keep the structures in place. We didn't know what we would see in the way of worms and nematodes. The spade sampling quickly confirmed that we were seeing greatly increased numbers, different types of worm, different levels, all levels. And the other thing is, we obviously drill the whole field. We have roadways, and we have some areas that we don't use quite so much of. And in those areas, the plants and the grasses did flower, and as a result, we're providing really valuable biodiversity. Put a slide in there just so you can have a visual sort of picture of what I'm talking about, but also it demonstrates one of the techniques that I introduced to try and maximise the amount of green cover that we were able to retain. Everything in the foreground there is one paddock, and traditionally the sows would have the whole lot, but they spend most of the time around the huts, trekking across to the feeder at feed time, to the drinker and back to the huts. By drilling it in grass, we immediately gave them a grazing around the whole area, and it became a huge increase in the amount of activity. But I put up an idea of having a flip system. So to the left of that picture, where it's looking a lot greener, that area is being rested. And after about 7-8 weeks, the fence line is flipped. The next sows arriving, those paddocks get the regenerated area, and the section to the right gets given a rest. The sows have the middle area the whole time, so the huts never move, the drinker never moves, and there's a water tank and then a wallow next to it that you can't really see. That's obviously established, and that stays in exactly the same place. The only piece of equipment other than the single strand of fence, which is a very quick and easy job to do, is we're moving the long troughs where we feed the sows, and that's quite a good strategy anyway, because there's an awful lot of sow traffic, compaction and nutrient loss around the feeders, so giving that area of field a break, moving it across to the other side was a big advantage to retaining the grass. So we talk a little bit about producer benefits. There's a number of potential benefits. I've already talked about the grazing, obviously pig welfare, improving the environment and the aesthetics of the unit, which should be important to all of us. Some units are far more visible than others. We get a lot of traffic driving by us on some of the main roads in Norfolk, and we really are an advert for ourselves, a living, working billboard, if you like. So it's really important that what we're doing looks right to people, basically, and it looks as good as it possibly can. The grass is helping with enrichment. The sows are more physically active. Going back to the previous slide, you can see the green area. Basically, where we've got tussocks of greener grass, that's they're dunging and urinating. In the past, if we were on bare earth, we'd end up with latrine areas, really concentrated areas, often just in front of the huts. But because they're travelling the entire area of the paddock, then the manure spread is, again, entirely over the whole area, and that shows that quite nicely, I thought. The sows love eating the grass, and as a result of that, they stop eating their bedding. Straw's expensive, straw's quite in short supply as well, labour intensive, fuel involved in restrawing huts, and probably not quite so good for their digestive systems as fresh grass going through. So that was an observation that we quickly occurred, that our straw usage on the unit was reduced. Turning attention to ourselves as staff, it's a much nicer place to work. I talked earlier about wind blowing around, but just generally the heat. It's cooler on the field when it's covered in grass. We want our staff to be proud of what they do. We all love showing people around the farm, and it's an awful lot easier to be proud of it when the entire site's covered in grass. It really is quite a transformation. But you do have to do everything you can to maintain it for the whole time we're on the site. It's not worth the effort of drilling it all, preparing it for the sows, and then losing it within 6 months. So the second slide I've got, again, shows an aerial shot of a fair chunk of the unit. That's a service radial with dry sow blocks in the foreground. That's about 12 months in, so we're about halfway through. A little bit more grass was lost in certain areas on the service radial. The bores are quite destructive, so we did lose areas in the service area, but on the whole, that's a fairly good representation of, we cleared all our equipment, and that's what we gave back to our landlord. It's a little bit more complicated than just moving onto a stubble field that's just been baled, so you do need to plan ahead. And several years ahead as well, especially if you're going to incorporate grass areas that your landlord has had previously in a scheme. I sat down with our landlord on Monday to discuss his cropping plans and our site moves for the coming years, and we got as far ahead as 2028. And I said yesterday, I've always heard of people talking about planting trees for the next generation, but I'm starting to feel like I'm possibly starting to plant grass for the next generation as well. It's really important as well that your landlord does have to be on board. We're drilling the grass in August, September after harvest. We're then attempting to move on to it in, however you like to look at it, late winter, early spring. The nights are long, the days are short, so we're tight on hours, so it is important that as much planning and preparation is done beforehand. Things like laying on the water supply, it just needs to be done a little bit ahead. But on the whole, the landlords are very cooperative because he will see benefits. I've concentrated very much on the practical farming side of it, the areas that I'm involved with on the day-to-day. A lot of sampling, a lot of results, a lot of data was collected, and that is all available. There's several case studies. One of the best I think you can link to through the King's Crops catalogue, but certainly if you put in LSB pigs, grass trial, case study, you're going to get results. You'll find searches and lots of data there. Thank you.
So I feel I'm the last one up as such. You've had two very good and detailed presentations. So I'm going to try and bring it all back together. So I'm John Gilliland. I work for the environment team in AHDB. And so I'm going to focus predominantly on pork production. I'm sorry if there's any poultry people here, but listen, let's have a go at this. I noticed earlier on when Helen asked the question about were there any pig farms here, and also had they done an LCA, and I did see a hand up. And it's really interesting when you do an LCA on a pig farm, is when you actually go through it, what you find is that actually the lion's share of your footprint of pork production is actually related to the feed and manure. And this is really important to get your head around, because actually it is probably the one that pig farmers have the least control of. And in AHDB, not only do we support levy pairs in pig and pork production, but we also do in cereals and oilseeds. And of course, it's really interesting if you then look at the footprint of a ton of grain. If you go over and look at that, what is the big footprint in grain? Well, it's actually manures. And it doesn't come as a surprise that actually, when my grandfather had pigs, he also had grain. There was a reason that our grandparents did that. Now, for all the right reasons, we've all we've all specialized into certain enterprises. But certainly, one of the best ways to try and help pig production is having a better relationship with the people who grow your feed. And if you can help get their footprint down, you get your footprint down too. And so, there is something to be said, is how do we work better in the pig industry with the people who produce the feed and that cyclic benefit. So I would encourage certainly people to look a little bit more laterally on this journey, particularly around looking at greenhouse gas reductions in pig production. But it's really important when we talk about this that we just don't focus on carbon. So one of the big messages AHDB are articulating on behalf of levy pairs is we, and I'm a farmer too, we as farmers actually deliver multiple public goods for society. And actually the very first thing we do is we produce nutritionally dense and diverse food. All animal source foods are nutritionally dense and diverse. And it's really important we keep articulating that on your behalf. The second thing is actually when we go to look at the environment, we are involved in several bits of it, not just in climate change and carbon, but actually in soils. We've just had a very good presentation from Rob about the benefit to soils. And I only hope, Rob, that your landlord appreciates what you do to his arable rotation with your pigs and particularly your grass. But many of those landscapes also have other features. Now, quite often pig producers don't have ownership or control of them. Some do. But actually looking at the carbon stocks, Helen's already highlighted a little bit about the carbon stocks and soils and trees. On top of that then, the whole issue of water. So particularly outdoor pigs, the runoff from that, where does it go? Rob talked about before he started planting grass, in heavy rainfall, some gullying could have happened. Where does that go to? It goes into a water course. Rob also highlighted the benefits of nematodes of his system as such, so the biodiversity. Remember, 60% of biodiversity out there, is not birds, bees, and butterflies. It's actually under our soil. Okay? So actually the role, particularly of outdoor pigs, but also indoor pigs and their manure, the role that manure plays on the soil. And lastly, most important, and you can tell I'm a farmer, is for me what also is a public good is pig producers making money. Because what happens when pig producers make money? They spend money. And actually, you take farmers out of the rural economy, you actually lose large bits of that engine that it drives that rural economy. So key in this is this journey isn't just about carbon. It's about the full public goods that we provide. So when I come back and start to talk about carbon again, it's actually really important when we talk about carbon that all of us, when we're engaging either with the people who buy our pigs or with our neighbours or just concerned citizens, is we actually explain to them that actually this isn't just about emissions. Farming is cyclic, carbon is cyclic, livestock, their manures are cyclic. We emit, we sequester. So actually one of the real key drivers that AHDB are doing on behalf of levy payers is articulating this through our reputational work and making sure people understand that this journey is not just about emissions. So net carbon or net zero is about where the sum of emissions equals the sum of greenhouse gases sequestered in either in our soils or in our trees, adjusted, just as Helen has flagged up, for any fossil fuels we displace through using renewables, and any waste management like AD that we do in reducing methane emissions through waste as such. And what's really important to understand is that actually, if we talk about zero emissions, if we were to deliver zero emissions, what would it mean? It would mean no animals, but it would also mean no humans too. So it's really important that a lot of our work is done is we change the narrative from gross emissions to net carbon. And that's why in AHDB we're very supportive of the calculator. We're very supportive of the work that Helen and her team in ADAS have done with the review of calculators, but particularly bringing in carbon stocks, carbon sequestration, so those businesses can look at the net of their whole business and not just the footprint of an animal. The other things that AHDB are doing in this space on behalf of levy payers is also looking at the system around the measurements. There are two main drivers for coming on farms looking at measurement. The very first one actually comes from governments. The United Kingdom government has signed up under Kyoto, has signed up to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing carbon stocks. The tool they use is a thing called the Greenhouse Gas National Inventory. This was created at the start in 1990 when United Nations and IPCC started on this, but it was designed initially as a spreadsheet for the fossil fuel industry. And since 1990, other sectors of the economy have come into it, and we're the last sector to go in. But it does mean we've inherited a spreadsheet structure that makes our farming businesses really difficult to go in, because on a diverse farm that has more than one enterprise, and there are many pig farms that have more than one enterprise, you will find that your footprint actually ends up being reported under different silos. The first one, so the emissions from animals, sits in agriculture. The second one, if you're improving carbon stocks, sits in land use change and forestry. The third one, if you've got any renewables on your farm, sits in energy. And the fourth one, if you've got any waste management, sits in waste. And at the moment, the way this inventory is done, there is no room for insetting one against the other. So one of the roles, and I'm actually the AHDB representative on the Food Data Transparency Partnership of DEFRA's, and one of the issues we've clearly articulated is that we actually need to have some way of internally insetting carbon sequestration or renewables or waste management against the unavoidable emission that comes from an animal. And so that is one of the disconnects at the moment we're trying to address. The other disconnect we're trying to address is the other vehicle that's looking for measurements. So all of us sell livestock products, a processor buys them, processor sells them to a retailer or to the supply industry, but they're under pressure through the private sector under the Greenhouse Gas Protocol to declare their Scope 3 emissions. Now, Scope 3 emissions are actually not the emissions in processing food, or actually the fossil fuels involved in it. Scope 3 emissions are within the farm gate or before the farm gate. And so we have this Scope 3 reporting framework. We also have a government who's just consulted around that, maybe bringing all of this into legislation. And we have a difficulty, again, a disconnect, and that is they call it Scope 3 emission declaration, not Scope 3 net carbon declaration. So one of the big issues we're trying to build into this in our representation of levy payers, AHDB is not a lobbying organization, but it states the facts. It shows the evidence as such, and I'll talk a little bit more about our baselining project in a moment. So key in that, again, is getting carbon removals and sequestration in that, and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that sits above that is now got a piece of work which is due to report back at the end of this year about how do we bring carbon removals or carbon sequestration into Scope 3 declarations. So one of the key things AHDB is starting off to do is actually a pilot exercise around environmental baseline. And this is an area that I particularly have been involved in for the last 7 years. I farm in Northern Ireland. We've been at the forefront of baselining. And the reason we're interested in baselining is actually, if you don't have a baseline, if you change your behavior, how do you know if that behavioral change has actually had any benefit whatsoever? And the concept is you do a baseline, you then change your practices, and you repeat the baseline again. It's really important that we can do that so we as farmers know, is the change I made beneficial to my business? Is it beneficial to the environment? And is it something I can build into my narrative for the food chain so they can maybe position my product better? So this baselining we're doing it, I've already done it in 7 farms in Northern Ireland. We're going to do it in 170 farms in Great Britain. Some of those will be pork producers. And if anyone's interested here or knows of anyone interested, we would encourage them to let us know through our baselining website there that you can go to before the end of June. Some of the key things we're going to do is actually we're going to use quite sophisticated technologies, particularly around the landscape. And this is particularly relevant for outdoor pig production, but also the landscape that takes manures from indoor pig production. Is we're going to use technologies, aerial technologies called LiDAR, that physically scan the landscape at a minimum of 16 points per square meter. A satellite will do 1 point per 10 square meters. So this is really accurate. And we can use this data then to create what we call runoff risk maps so that we can look at mitigating any potential running off of manures into our water courses. But it also helps us measure trees and hedges around our fields as such. We're going to measure our soil down to what we call the sea horizon, the bedrock, in 0 to 15, 15 to 30 centimeters and down, so that if we're laying more carbon down, we can pick it up and change that every 5 years. So key in that is then bringing the LiDAR, the analysis of all of that together, our soil sampling, is that then that allows us to have a net carbon calculation, but a calculation that recognizes not only nutrients and soil biology, but the animals. It has integrity. We feed this back so we can help every farmer know their own numbers. This journey is not about people preaching at us. It's about us getting knowledge so we make better quality decisions as such. And that is built in to the benefits of any farms that participate. They will get a fully funded carbon footprint. They will get their measurements of some of their soil and landscape carbon. They'll get runoff risk maps and our soil analysis. This will all be independent as such, so it will all be done to one scheme, one calculator. I mean, I absolutely agree with Helen. When you go on this journey, whatever calculator you start with, you stay with. And the idea is so that we can compare apples with apples, not apples with oranges. And that we will tailor then plans with you as farmers on a one-to-one support. The benefit for the industry of this is, first of all, one of the roles I do for AHDB is actually to go out and articulate the benefits of the industry, but also defend the industry when we're being criticized. And our database today is minimal and it's quite old. This will give us a really up-to-date database to which we can go and articulate the benefits of what we're doing and defend us when we're under attack. It will also allow then, with this change over 5 years, it will allow us then to articulate the need for financial benefit to farmers for the changes they make. It will allow us to articulate the change from gross emissions to net carbon, and it will allow us to help better quality decisions be made at a policy level. And as I say, if you're interested, please do go onto our website, register there, and we would be delighted to come and have a conversation with you. So I really just want to finish from AHDB's point of view. The reason we're supporting this seminar today is our job as the custodian of your levy is to inspire our farmers, our levy payers, growers and industry that actually our food is key to succeed in this rapidly changing world. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our speakers. There's a lot of technical content in there. We have run slightly over on time, but we have still got a little bit of time for questions if anybody has any. Over here, we've got a mic somewhere on its way to you. You just put your hand up, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Can you please let me know how this works for pig producers who rent land across the catchments? So we work with Cranswick at the moment, but they rent a land from a number of our farmers. So is there any potential in that scenario?
I think it should be on.
Yeah. So one of the key things in this is about a partnership. They rent land, okay, and key in that is the relationship with the landlord. So the landlord is also interested in what is happening on their own farm. All right, they get a rent, but actually, if we go to Rob's example, the benefit of putting pigs into rotation, putting grass down, the fertility benefit, the carbon benefit as such. At least with this baselining, it will allow us to put some figures around what is that benefit, so that when you're having those conversations with landlords, is you can have a more informed conversation. So we feel this is really important. We can't do this on our own. Landlords have to go on this journey too, and I know something at Cranswick are really interested on too, is that it is really important that, one, landlords want to continue to allow pig production as part of their rotation.
Yes.
But at the same time, the pig production gets a benefit of it, and it doesn't all go to the landlord, okay? And so this will at least will put the data around it so that you can have a far more informed conversation with your landlord and with the pig producer.
Sorry, just following to that, my understanding is that farmers have 6-year rotation when it comes to renting the fields out. So pigs are in a field for 2 years in cycle of 6 years. Will this be applicable again in that scenario?
So in the case of rented land, we still have to work out the finer detail as such, okay? But there's two parts to this. One is the calculator, and we'd be looking to come back to the calculator every 2 years. So we'd be wanting to follow we would like to do a baseline on the land as well, because we'd like to see some of the benefits. I think the issue we will need to discuss is whether, because on most other farms, on a 5-year rotation, we would be looking to come back at the end of 5 years and do it again. And I think we have to discuss internally, because the pig rotation is so short, will we see enough of a difference to pick it up at the end of the 2 years? And I think we need to decide, with the support of the pig farmers wanting to apply, what's the best thing now. We haven't got a set in concrete at the moment, okay?
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
I have a question for Rob, if that's okay. Rob, based on your trial in Norfolk, we have replicated the trial in Nottinghamshire. It's ongoing at the moment. From your now hindsight, what worked the best for you and what didn't really, except herbal lays?
Yes, except for herbal lays. I think early discussions with the landlord are very important, planning ahead. But also anything you can do to extend the time period from drilling to the sows occupying the field. Initially we were working on, the first time we ever tried grass, we drilled after harvest and we had the pigs on there before Christmas, which was very ambitious and simply just did not work. So we extended to after Christmas, and most of the sows are now moved by 1st of April is our deadline, because our landlord's growing sugar beet after us. But if you can find some way that that land can be drilled into grass and established over a number of years and managed well in between, so obviously mowing it, if you take a forage crop off it possibly or whatever, the longer it is in establishment, then the more likely you are to retain it. And retaining it is absolutely key, really.
Yes, thank you. And one more question, sorry. We are finding that track management was not great. Did you have any problems with your track management?
As in the roadways?
Yes, yes.
So it depends a little bit on the soil type. We've managed to have some roadways with grass cover across them almost the whole time, and we've had others which have ended up with ruts. Partly due to the way we feed our sows these days with long troughs. It means that the machinery that feed are committed to driving in virtually the same place every single day. And obviously that then concentrates the compaction and the wear on the grass. But even when we've lost the grass on the traffic areas, we still end up with a verge and often that sort of 3-ply effect with a strip of grass down the middle. When it comes to controlling runoff, that will still help. But also thinking about the direction of your roadways as well. You can make a roadway a river quite easily if you go the way the water would naturally flow off the site. So it can be an advantage. You can actually use them to your advantage to create almost like a buffer. So think about that sort of thing, really. Yeah, and it's also useful if you have knowledge of the field. It's always harder the first time you're on a field. And we're lucky we've been on the same site now, for the same farm landlord for over 30 years, so we're pretty knowledgeable about the fields even prior to grass.
Go on, please.
I want to ask Rob a question, because I'm learning here on the job on this one as well. You said that the sows quite happily graze the grass. Okay. The two questions I want to ask is how much nutrition would have come from that grass as a percent? Is it 5%? Is it 20%?
I always presumed there'd be very little nutritional value, but obviously there's contentment and there's gut fill and there's fibre, and we all know that fibre is important for our diets, and it's just the same for a pig. So there is a benefit. I have recently been listening to people talking, saying, actual fact, these sows are managing to get quite a bit from the grass. We did a sugar beet trial where we fed large volumes of sugar beet, and we had the grass on the field, and all of a sudden the grass, we were feeding about 6 kilograms a day instead of dry sow food would have been a couple of kilos a day, and the grass just shot away. We had to start mowing the grass, so it gave us a bit of an indication of what sort of weight of grass the sows are eating each day.
Hence the reason I'm asking the question, because I think you'll find the sows are getting more from it, and particularly the one thing about grass putting that in is you get diversity of micronutrients. And I'm just wondering, I don't know who buys your animals from you. Have you ever considered actually looking at the micronutrient content of the meat?
So we're processor linked in the BPP supply chain. So that's certainly something that their research people would be interested in looking at, I'm sure. It's further down the road. I say goodbye to them as 10-kilo wieners. So
I've had the privilege of being in Portugal twice this year. And if anyone loves, when I go to Portugal, one of the things I love to eat is their special acorn beef or a pig meat, and it's just delicious. And it's really interesting how bringing grass or other plant-based into a monogastric diet, how it actually can have beneficial, either taste or micronutrient benefits. So I'd love just to see, is there an extra win in there that has not been captured yet?
So there are rearers and finishers who are rearing outside on grass, so that's certainly something that would be relevant to those businesses, yes.
Sneak in some maleic acid somewhere, I think that's the key, isn't it? All right, we have overrun slightly, so I will bring it to a close unless there's any last burning questions, and I know John's catching flights and all sorts. But I just wanted to thank you again for your participation. We've got all the information on baselining and the ADAS links to the calculators and some of Rob's work as well on our website and via our contact details. So just come over and we can send you any more information if you require of it. Lastly, I just want to thank you all for participation, safe trip home, and thank you again so much to all of our speakers on the second day and the afternoon of the second day as well, when people are starting to get a bit tired. So thank you so much for a stimulating discussion right to the end of the fair. Thank you very much.